join us on stage, Laura Doughty, who's Head of Strategy and Major Projects at Sellafield, Harbinder Birdie, who is, I'm very excited to say, a genuine bona fide design champion of Grand Union Water Transfer Project, Samir Begayan, who is, there you are, Samir, lovely, who is currently Vice President at RTPI and is going to cover for us all the planning angles, and last but not, and getting a chair, which is, I'm pleased to say, is Daryl Murphy, who is Managing Director, Head of Infrastructure Debt at Aviva Investors. He's the man with all the money, and actually has put some money into half, I believe. So collectively, if this group can't solve the challenge of making major projects happen, then nobody can. So this is the gang to make it happen. So I'll just ask you all kind of slightly different sort of question to sort of around getting projects going, and around what is the biggest major barrier to getting projects going. And I think, Tim sort of began to touching on it there, around just, I guess public support and expectation and managing expectation. So I'll start with you, Harbinder, because you've got an interesting role to in terms of like making projects feel like they need to happen in the first place. So 10 seconds on who you are, and then 20 seconds on answering my question.
Great. So my name's Harbinder. I'm an architect. My background is designing lots of big projects like the Elizabeth Line Thames Tideway. And I'm currently the design champion for the Grand Union Canal Transfer Project. And the design champion is a mandated role developed by the NIC and the IPA. And it mandates that on the board, or at senior level of every major project, they have an independent designer that ensures that the project that is being delivered is of the highest possible quality. So I'm the independent design champion for the Grand Union Canal Transfer Project. And I think regarding engagement, because we're going through a DCO at the moment, and currently we've got 2 months of consultation. And it's fair to say that the DCO, unlike the hybrid bill, there's almost like a more succinct period in which consultation occurs. And I think to get people on board, the public on board, is how well we listen to the people. And it's probably fair to say that most people that object to even the next door neighbour's planning extension are a certain type. I think what we need to do is actually get as many voices as possible when we do engagement, because these projects are typically, they're a marathon, not a sprint. So they're there for a long period of time, and typically they cause disruption as well. And I think getting the right design vision and the design principles to say to the communities, this is what you're going to get back, it's worth it, I think is really important. And I think one of the reasons why the design champion is on board is to effectively embed, steer, support that vision and principle throughout the duration of the project. So you've got to be in it for the long game. And I think we sometimes underestimate the story that we tell about the infrastructure that we are providing for the country. And I think we potentially could be telling a better story. And if you look at 2 projects that are really successful, the Elizabeth Line and Thames Tideway, they are phenomenal projects. I'm looking at Andy Alder, who's worked on both. They're transformational. The Elizabeth Line, when we first designed it, I remember, 14, 15 years ago, the modelling was design a world-class metro for a world-class city that will take 440,000 people a day. It typically takes 1 million. So I would say we under-designed it. Now, why is it that if we design something that's so good, strangely more people want to use it? So I think we really underestimate the value of good design and the compounding effect it has over the next 100 years. And I think that's where the design pedigree that we have particularly in this country, I would say are actually underutilized in terms of being able to turn around projects for the country.
Great, thank you, Harbinder. Now, we started today by Jason posing the question, who is our spokesperson, our leader, our advocate of infrastructure? And it pains me always to say, yet again, it's the architect who is leading the way in articulating the case for our infrastructure. But thank you, Harbinder, for so brilliantly putting the case for good design. Laura, if I turn to you next, I mean, Sellafield operates in a very unique space and a very unique location, doing some very sensitive things. And over the years, you've had a lot of experience of building public trust, building public buy-in to what you're achieving there. So talk to us about, how you've approached that, how you feel that could be brought to bear elsewhere.
Sure. Well, at Sellafield, our delivery challenge is a little bit, as you say, unique in that we are managing the nuclear byproducts of energy defence and things that have happened in the past. And these are things that need to be stored carefully for a very long time, and that process needs to be handled very carefully. And it happens on a regulated site, which means that even though the community is well aware of us, because the reality is if you live in West Cumbria, odds are very good you either work at Sellafield, or your mum does, or your cousin does, or your job exists as a consequence of the investment in Sellafield. So our community is us, so we are one and the same, and so we're not, Mark was talking about High Speed 2 before, that is not our challenge. And I would say our challenge is also not convincing government that they need us. Our challenge is convincing government, and particularly funding bodies, that if they give us the money we need to deliver our mission, that we're going to spend that money sensibly. We're going to keep people safe, we're going to get value for money, we're going to do the right thing by our supply chain, that we're going to do the right thing by the environment, that we're going to do the right thing when it comes to jobs and employment and skills. So really, for us, delivery confidence is what's key, and showing that we know what we're doing. And in the past, we didn't always have that delivery confidence. So that has been something that we've been really focused on in the last 8 to 9 years, is how do we make sure that when people like NISTA come to review us, that we're getting green confidence assessments, that when the National Audit Office comes for one of their very character-building visits, that, that we're walking away with sensible feedback so that when it comes time to say, where are we going to spend the limited public funds that we have, government can feel confident to say, actually, we're comfortable to give this to Sellafield because we know that they'll do the right thing by us.
Brilliant. And we'll be talking more about how we improve delivery later. But absolutely, so critical to building confidence is confidence in delivery and execution. So yeah, absolutely. Coming to you next, Samir. Now, you wear many hats. Elected councillor, so you understand how to, win the public round. We'll touch on that for sure. But wearing your, I guess, bit of your RTPI hat, planning is crucial, as has been someone touched on a little bit today already. And Mark Thurston talked earlier about the planning infrastructure bill as a potential great enabler for helping shift the way we deliver major projects. Where do you see the kind of biggest challenges, biggest opportunities to getting the big projects going?
Right. Oh, is this working?
Yes.
Yes. Excellent. So just as a disclaimer to start with, I am Vice President of the RTPI. I am not here speaking in an official RTPI capacity.
Oh, come on, yeah.
Otherwise, the comms team will be will be down on me like a hammer. So I work for Arcadis. I'm a director with Arcadis. But I also run a planning school at the University of the Built Environment, actually. So I kind of see it from the skill side, from the delivery side, but also, as you mentioned, Mark, from kind of the broader profession and the stakeholder engagement side. I think just reflecting on the discussions we had, or we listened to this morning, the idea of thinking spatially has come up. I think Ed, I don't know if Ed's still in the room, but the idea that NISTA has a spatial planning team I thought was really interesting, because one of the biggest, and if I start by kind of flagging a barrier, first of all, and then kind of look at where some of the issues are, I think the biggest barrier is uncertainty. And by uncertainty, I think it's uncertainty about priorities, although they are becoming clearer. Uncertainty about sequencing, that's somehow becoming clearer. But I think more importantly, uncertainty about where things are going to go. And that's where this idea of NISTA having a spatial planning team I thought was really interesting. The one thing that maybe we didn't get a chance to talk about this morning is how will that work once you start building the spatial geographies around spatial development strategies which are coming through the system. So we've got a bottom-up approach to where things are spatially. So that's the major infrastructure, but more importantly, if you're a local authority or if you're a mayoral strategic authority, it's the housing and the infrastructure. And then you've got the national stuff coming through, presumably through NISTA. And that's the National Spatial Plan and that broader register of projects which is being updated as we heard. So how do those two come together, I think is really important. And I think the one thing that would be helpful to change is to think about the where and why of all of those. Now, I can't ask NISTA to talk to the local authorities doing their infrastructure upwards through spatial development strategies, because we've only yesterday had the guidance published for spatial development strategies. So we haven't done that piece yet, but we have got the top-down piece. And I think at some point, probably I would expect NISTA to engage more with the local authorities around where the infrastructure is, probably more than they have done in the last 12 to 15 months. I think that's probably one of those things which will make a big difference to things moving forward.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, we turn to the man with the money. Always important voice in the room, Daryl. How are we doing? How are we doing to present ourselves as an investable opportunity in this bold, exciting new era infrastructure? And what can we do better?
I think, thanks so much. Set up. I think I was going to be actually quite humble from an investor point of view, because I think one of the things you need to remember is that if I can speak for the whole of my sort of grouping or sort of peer group, that we're quite precious characters. So we have a very short attention span. Because when you're thinking about this, for private investment these days in the UK, without getting to a policy point, obviously hugely is focused around consumer-funded infrastructure. So in this day and age, it's really everything's pointing towards energy, utilities, digital, etc. So we kind of moved away actually from large-scale infrastructure in social and even public transport openly, because without a sort of PPP model, then there's little opportunity for private capital. So when we talk about these assets, I'm thinking all the time of, we refer to Tideway. There's sort of a small number of standout assets like Tideway. Obviously, Harp is a good example of that come through. You go to then Sizewell, again, is another good example, which is debatable about how much private capital is against public capital. But then you also look at, in our world, into offshore wind, into carbon capture and storage, and the large mega projects are few and far between where there is private capital. I think the common theme I'd say is that, I mean, clearly we're very impatient, but I think everyone here is. I think just that exercise to go faster has to really come across. And it feels, particularly when it's energy transition related, we just need to change gear a little bit, right? Now, I'm a big sucker for consultations, unlike a lot of my peers. I mean, we are consulted to death. And actually, I'd say, and I was reminded on the Grand Union project, I mean, if you think about HARP, you know, it's like waiting for buses in a sense. There's some gap before the next DPC or sort of SIPA project. And I have been consulted on at least 6, I'd say. The last one is, it may have been the Grand Union, correct me if I'm wrong, you tell me on the dates. And I sat there and they said, well, we'll be financial close about, is it 20, I don't know if you saw a project, or 28, 29, and even I'm thinking at my stage, I'm not sure if it's still going to be around by that point. But I'm going, look, for most investors, that's kind of put that away, I'm not interested. Right? Now, I feel, you know, I'm engaged and I'm interested, and I don't mind providing a bit of advice, because it's important early on. But actually, to get people's attention and investment early on is very challenging. Sizewell really suffered on this. Obviously, the problem was, HARP is a little bit different, but where you're trying to have a commercial negotiation over a long period of time is tricky. So at Sizewell, you know, EDF were ferrying, literally, I mean, you know, in buses, people down to Hinckley, investors, probably about 6 years ago, to show them Hinckley and say, this is a great opportunity. And look how long it takes to get to close. And no wonder by the time you get to the end of it, people have moved on. Now, without sounding a bit precious, investors can spend literally billions very quickly. I mean, you can go and buy, in an M&A situation, even some of the sponsors, you know, Tim's working with, buy assets for billions within about 6 months. So that's their kind of benchmark about how they deploy that capital. So somehow we've got to align that to, can we just go a little faster? Now, I understand why, but I do think sometimes we allow the planning, consenting, etc., to kind of get in the way of actually it just takes this long.
So I mean, gets back to you, Tim and Neil. Really, you're the kind of vanguard of this. You know, it's taken a, you know, in Daryl's time frame, it still took too long, but it's happened. It's happening. So I guess, yeah. What crumbs of comfort can you offer in terms of how projects which are lining up behind you to sort of take a similar approach? What should we do?
So yeah, I mean, there's all of the strategic resource options that you're referring to. There's some 27, 30 different schemes coming through, about £50 billion worth of investment. So there's quite a big pipeline there. But I share your concerns, and we had this all the way through the tender process for HARP, was getting everybody interested in it. Someone said to me very early on, he said, well, you might get a contractor in a room, but the investors won't bother until the last 5 minutes. So it is hard to sort of get people engaged in all of that. And one of the things that I know that Ofwat are doing at the moment is looking at that kind of template version of the contract. We built something from scratch, a lot of hard work, a lot of hard yards, took a long time. Aside from all the planning stuff, which we can, I think everyone can empathise with, but I think having that and having some of the communication that the regulators are doing at the moment through Rapid, in terms of sharing that pipeline, giving confidence that this is actually going to be delivered, and actually giving everybody a proper overview of what the commercial arrangements need to be and the regulatory framework that surrounds it will be really, really important. I was at a Ofwat-hosted contractor roundtable the other week. And there's still nervousness, there's still a lack of understanding in the detail of how these projects work. People have, it's been a long time since a lot of the companies were involved in PFIs. And when we started the conversations with contractors on HARP, it was, post-Carillion, so there's a lot of nervousness around things that could be anywhere near that kind of construct. So I think having that communication from the centre, telling people collectively as opposed to me having to do it, you having to do it for Grand Union Canal, somebody else having to do it for another project, will be really good to sort of get the market more up to speed with how these things work. Because at the moment we've got one DPC that's just been delivered and one CIPRA project, so there's not that much knowledge in the market.
Yeah. I'd worry just a little bit on, and what we didn't mention was looking ahead, Lower Thames Crossing. That's the next challenge, which is, that's very complicated in terms of the mechanism still in flight around using revenue, Dartford, etc. The complexity on the fact you already started under a certain contractual arrangement is probably going to have to change. I mean, that is going to be hard, openly, to get a lot of investors very excited about, because it's too easy. I mean, it sounds incredibly precious, but it's too easy to go and do something else, right? So I think if you're going to be concerting on private capital, you've got to really make a big effort, I think, up front.
I think what I would say, if you take it up 10,000 feet, Mark, we talk about getting these projects away, and I think Darryl makes the right segue here, because LTC is very different. And you're going to have to, if you're going to get it off balance sheet, you're going to have to think very differently about removing it completely from government hands. That's the point here, because if the government are looking at a very empty barrel in terms of the investment needed for roads, railways, more schools, more hospitals, etc., some way they're going to have to find a way of making sure that it comes off the balance sheet, and then people in Darryl's fraternity then can see actually a much stronger pipeline for investment, and therefore if they've got more longer term pipeline, they can get much better deals, then the contractors get more comfortable, and therefore you'll get back to a rhythm where actually ultimately the customer, not the government, the customer will get a better price and a better return for their contribution.
And I mean, that sounds like quite a big ask, but we've got some big brains on the stage here to help us tackle that. I mean, how do we begin to sort of nibble away at that? I guess that will nibble away quite quickly as well. I guess in terms of planning confidence, is that a key part to play in this? Is that a key area where we can make a difference?
Look, it's not my field, but I'm fairly I shouldn't say this, but I'm fairly indifferent about the planning approach. You've still got to do your stakeholder management. Yep. You've still got to do your environmental assessment. You've still got to do your economic benefits. You've still got to look at your finances. All of those things are fundamental before you actually put your consent in place. So I don't really think it's a consenting issue. I actually think it's first of all, it's a political issue. There's got to be a persuasion and advocacy why you want to do this in the first place and the benefit it will come to the country. But actually, the back end is how do the government then make it work for you? So if that means you strengthen the regulatory process, that's what you need to do. So my question is, we know what Ofwat can do because they look after customers. But what do the Office of Rail and Road do then? Question mark.
So, I mean, and it comes back to, well, it's coming strongly back to building advocacy, isn't it? And it coming back to that, getting people behind it in the first instance to really kind of own the project, want the project to happen. Again, from a sort of, from a building engagement point of view, and I guess this is very much a hearts and minds kind of question. So, I mean, again, you look at this from a people kind of point of view. What are we not quite bringing to the table, which we need to really sell our projects?
Well, there's something about the whole system not effectively doing the various bits of the system are meant to be doing at any given moment in time, and I think that's one of the critical bits. So, for example, where you try and resolve some strategic issues when you're already at project stage, I think you hit a glitch, and that's where you that's where you start having a hard time selling these things to the public. And I think, in some respect, for all nationally significant projects, you do end up somehow, it's just because of the way the system is designed and operates, you do end up re-arguing the need and the business case in some respect for the location. And we've seen that in HS2, for example. The environmental trade-offs, you argue those during examination, because these issues were never settled politically and from a stakeholder point of view further upstream where they've started. And I think if we are moving forward with a much stronger alignment between what the Treasury thinks, and it is the Treasury through NISTA, for example, and that relationship between infrastructure and growth, because it's still not very clearly articulated at the local authority level. We have spatial development strategies coming forward, but we have growth plans that are already in place in some of those local authorities. And it's not really clear what that interplay is between the two. What I think is key, and again, you'd expect me to say that given my RTPI role, but I also have an engineering hat as well. And I think I do understand the mismatch between the ambition and the ability to do things on the ground. But I think government has suddenly grasped the idea that you can't power a system without necessarily resourcing it properly. And we've seen that in terms of the MHCLG budget for resourcing around planning. I think from the 1st of April, we're at 49.6 million every year for the next 3 years. The challenge now, I think, now that the money is in place, now that the commitment to resourcing authorities and the organization delivering these projects is in place, is how is that money going to be spent? And I think that's an ongoing debate within MHCLG at the moment, actually. And there's some thinking emerging as to what that resourcing of the system actually looks like in order to better build that ability to kind of sell it to the public further upstream, which I think is absolutely critical. And again, NISTA isn't necessarily playing that role because that's not probably a role it was intended to play. So the question is who plays that role moving forward for the major infrastructure projects that are coming through the evolving pipeline.
Could I just add to that? I think a couple of things we need to do, both individually and ideally that representative. I think first thing we need to do is learn to speak plain English. I think we alienate a lot of the people we want to influence by, we've kind of drunk our own Kool-Aid and we geek out a bit on what we do, which is lovely, but it doesn't always make it that easy for other people to, we don't always pass the so what test for other people, whether it's financial investors, government. So I think, being kind to the people we actually want to engage with us by speaking in a language they get. If you've got something to visit, and you don't always, I think taking people to see what it is that is happening. It's very difficult for us to get people to West Cumbria and through all the security, but by Jove, it's worth it when they actually see what it is that can happen. And the other thing I wanted to plug was the ICG. So we're active members of ICG, and that was because we wanted to learn from other members, and we're 7 years down the road now, and other members are learning from us as well. What we didn't necessarily foresee at the start is that our stakeholders listen to the other members. It's much better if another member's saying good things about us than if we're saying good things about us. And we saw this happen for real last year when we were in front of the Public Accounts Committee. And one of the things they were very interested in was our major projects delivery. And it turned out that one of the Public Accounts Committee members had rung somebody that they knew in the Palace of Westminster restoration program and said, have you heard of what these people are doing at Sellafield? Yeah, we have. They've been sharing it with us and we're doing this and we're using that and they've been really helpful and they knew a lot about this. And then that member brought it up in the Public Accounts Committee. So that's, so plain English, show them what it actually means in practice in terms that relate to them, and think about who they're listening to and engage them as well.
Great, thanks, Laura. I mean, Harbinder, I guess that's, you would, I'm imagining would very much echo that argument. And I just think, I'm intrigued. I mean, you've got this design champion role to really kind of, champion excellence in Grand Union transfer scheme, which again, it's one of those sort of schemes which is it's quite hard to kind of get your head around what it's actually trying to achieve. But if we can sort of, and maybe we haven't done a very good job as an industry of describing a scheme like that, and I'm thinking Lower Thames Crossing is it's quite easy for us at engineering to sort of say, yeah, well, it's just going to, what it's going to achieve and do, but to the actual people it's affecting, have we really solved that really well in terms of, really putting it together?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how, infrastructure projects are marketed. I mean, if this was another industry, like the automotive industry, they'd have a completely different take on how they basically talk. And, the investors, I'm not going to MIPIM in a week's time, God forbid, but when you're on a yacht there and you talk to the guys with the gilets, the investors, all they want to do is hear a story it's a great project, I'll invest. And I'm amazed. You're right. They'll spend $6 billion over a glass of bubbles because they know a project and they see it on the phone and go, oh, it's that one. It's a gut feel. Because the delivery of a project, there's so many multivariables, it's so complex, they have to go with a gut to go, I've seen that visual, that's going to be a great project because of what it does, I'll invest in it and you'll have my back. And I think we probably could learn from other industries on how we market the infrastructure investment. So I think in the water industry for the next 5 years, over 100 billion, right? What other industry is going to spend that much? And are we talking about it enough? And what is it doing? It's giving us, what the country's doing, we're massaging water from the wet north to the dry south. It's going to cost £100 billion over the next 5 years. We need that. Without water, we've probably got 2 days in this and then we die, right? So it's a necessity. Are we really talking about that in a way that is inspiring the next generation? My son's 6.5, he's doing his A-levels. He's torn between chemical engineering and civil engineering, and he doesn't quite know which one he wants to do. He's my personal pension plan, so it'll probably be chemical engineering. He'll go into that. So I'm told. But it's, I do a lot of talks to young kids, and I say to them, when you're 21, do you want to start on a salary of £35,000 a year purely to do Minecraft in the real world? And they go, what, someone will pay me to do Minecraft? I went, yeah, but when you press send, it will be built and will be in the ground forever. That's the game. And they go, yes, I want to do it. And I think we don't really, there's 1 million young people out of work, right? And they're misemployed. They don't know what to do. And I think there is so much opportunity in the infrastructure sector for young talent. And actually, young people want to shape their environment. They really, really, really care. And I think how we promote infrastructure and the need for young talent now is critical because we've got this amazing group of people who want to sort of join that world. And I don't think we do it well enough compared to other sectors.
Can I just say, I'm going to go full circle for being the clinical investor, because it's an interesting point. It goes on to what Tim mentioned earlier. First point is, I've always been a big advocate of having some sort of Neil Coxford sort of, someone that actually can drive the sort of passion in infrastructure. We need a figure that could do that. And actually, there's it may sound trivial. If you think about the documentary that was done on Thames Tideway, it was a great way of showing it in reality. I'm sure these guys can build one, make a little TV show as well. And you've got to offset it against what currently running a TV series about pollution in the river. It's going to get much more focus, and that has a detrimental impact in terms of infrastructure. So we've got to get these good news stories out. There is a role of investors. So to mention, some of you saw on the slide, The investors, GLIL particularly, that is all local government pension schemes. That is local people investing in that asset. Equitix, a lot of their money, some it's international, a lot of that will be local money again. We're finding the same thing. The democratization of investment is going to help here by, we advocate, end of the day, any infrastructure fund generally who's got money from the UK, one way or another, it's either coming from someone saving for a pension or withdrawing their pension or annuity. And that is all that money going into infrastructure. And we're kind of missing an open goal with that, because that is a win-win by showing we can give you a good investment and improve the world that you're living in.
Great point. Tim, you've got your microphone poised. Samir, you want to come in as well? Samir, go.
Yeah, no, very quick. I mean, I agree with Harbinder on that point. And I think one of the reasons, and there's some work going on to try and somewhat convince the Treasury that the built environment sector actually, as a sector, as a whole, is a gross contributor, a substantial contributor to the UK economy, and actually even bigger than the financial services. And I think getting that point across, because the Treasury deals with the built environment sector in silos, and then it doesn't see the totality of what the sector can do. You know, there's professional services and a whole lot of other things. But it's very comfortable talking to the financial industry and the financial services as one sector. Even it includes, you know, auditors, insurance, and a whole lot of things. But they deal with it as the financial services. Now, I think if the Treasury dealt with the built environment sector as one sector, I mean, it's massive. Our contribution to the national economy is massive. If we were to build 300,000 homes a year, that's 3%, you know, growth on the economy every year, and that's all you need in some respect. But we're not seen that way, and we're not dealt with that way. And then the 250,000 job vacancies that are available for people in the built environment sector are not taken up. Because again, it's not really where it should be in terms of the attention it deserves.
Yeah. Agreed. Tim.
Look, I think what Tarbis has said is absolutely right. I mean, when you look at some of the projects that have been developed over the last 20 to 30 years, I was fortunate to be in Docklands in the mid-80s. Actually, a lot, you know, people forget Docklands came about because of a vision by Michael Heseltine. And all of a sudden, a master plan was developed. And then the infrastructure that just followed on behind it. And look at the jobs and the wealth creation that has caused. Another really good example is East West Rail. I mean, the guy who runs East West Rail, the East West Rail doesn't have a traditional business case. It does not have a traditional business case. What are you doing? You're actually joining the major cities throughout the arc, from Cambridge right the way through to Oxford, and you're generating an economic heartland. Actually, that's the kind of language that you need to actually drive the infrastructure projects in the first place. That's how Treasury wakes up, listens, because they can see further down the line where the income's coming from.
And I mean, there's a book that was written criticising HS2. You probably sort of seen it, Off the Tracks. It was interesting though, because and this is going to be quite can I be controversial?
Please.
And I read it, and it was interesting because the author, who was a local councillor, who effectively was a local councillor for Camden, and she was there looking at Euston, and she had a whole range of sort of criticisms of why the project was overrunning. But she made an assumption, actually, and she was on a podcast saying that public sector money should not be used on good design, as in grand design. And I think I took real issue with that, because I think there's a lot of myth about actually good design costs a lot of money. I don't think it does. I think there's a whole range of reasons why projects go overboard. But good design, I think, is essential, because if you look at the structures that were built over 150 years ago, where, like Brunel now, I mean, what would be the ROI on that? It was 3 times over budget, by the way, but it would sort of be discounted by somebody back in the day, right? He just turned around and goes, I'm going to do it anyway, right? And look at the return on it. The Elizabeth line now, right? Double the capacity, right? Look at the ROI on that. And I think, in a way, the thing about design and good design is that actually it says a lot about us, the state. And actually, I think, especially infrastructure, because effectively it's for everybody, it's where good design has to happen because effectively it's shared by all of us. And I think we need to unravel design and money and overrun, because I don't think it's actually about design. I think it's about other things. And I think we need to probe into that a bit more.
Well, thank you for that, Harbinder. And that is a very neat way to conclude this section of today's activities. I was going to say a very also useful segue into, as we're going to take a short break up here on ICG Live Stage, where there is, back down on the keynote stage shortly, we have got a piece on England's economic heartland and raising wealth creation in that area. So if you do want to pop downstairs, check that out, please feel free. But we will be back here, if I just quickly switch to my notes, which I've lost. We will be back here at 2:45, and we will be back here at 2:45 absolutely sharp, because we've then got 2 back-to-back sessions which are pretty packed. So please do get back here promptly for those. We'll be first of all tackling the issue of resilience and aging assets, and then we're going to be talking about actually making the whole thing happen very productively and collaboratively, and so you don't want to miss that either. So please be back here for that. But in the meantime, if you could thank everybody on this fabulous panel, I think we can all agree on where the answers are at. So thank you all.